Right. Oh, I'm just getting the microphone. Okay, finally started to work on the gitea formula itself. I'm being a bit naughty. I promised myself I was going to write the tests first. However, I actually got stuck into writing the formula itself. I think the main lesson to be taken away from this exercise, the gitea formula that is with salt states and formula in particular, it's very important to use long descriptive names, and it is worthwhile using names that reflect the structure of the formula. For example, if you have got a state to install the software from a binary, then you want the state to start at the root with gitea. And if you just invoke gitea, the default behavior you would expect would be to verify that gitea was installed, that git was installed, that the database was connected, not that the database was installed, because that's a separate issue. I think we've discussed that previously. And that the gitea service was running. Now, all of that is in the gitea init.sls, but it's broken out into, for example, you can install gitea from a package manager like apt, yum, and so on. But only for certain operating systems. You can install from binary. You can just download the binary, or you can download an archive, an XZ archive. And each of those comes with a different set of conditions about the way it needs to be set up, and certain things that you need to do in preparation. So, for example, if you want to install it from the archive, then you need the xzutils package installed prior to installing or attempting to install the archive, because otherwise it won't expand it. Similarly, you've got the same problem or a similar problem with the binary. When you install the binary, you have to make sure that, for example, the user you want to run as exists. All of this sort of stuff is taken care of for you if you install from a package. But if, as I am, I'm going to install it in a Debian instance, there is no Debian package at the moment. So you need to sort of be aware of these things when you're creating the structure. So we have, for example, gitea at the root, then you've got software, and then you've got package, archive, binary. There's three options, each of which will have an install script. Then they all have a common way of configuring. That is to say, there's expected to be an app.ini file which has got all of the gitea configuration in it. Now, normally you would install gitea and then you would run it, and the first time you ran it, there would be a web installer which would write the configuration based on how you respond. Now, obviously, if you're using Salt, the chances are you just want to supply that configuration file. So we have to have a configuration template, and therefore you're going to end up with a software.config for configuration. You're going to have a separate thing, software.service perhaps, for managing the service, or possibly just a gitea.service for managing the service. And then you've got the software prerequisites, things like xz.util, git, and so on. On top of that, and outside of the formula, but you want it in the formula documentation, is the fact that you need to install a Postgres database in order for it to work. And obviously you need that information in the the connection information needs to be in the configuration file, and by extension needs to be in your pillar data. So obviously that all needs to be explained how you get that information. And that in itself is a non-trivial problem, because each installation will need to generate, for example, its own secret tokens. And you need a consistent way of doing that. Oh, you can also install it as Docker, but I'm not dealing with that, because if I wanted to install it as Docker, I wouldn't use this formula. I would use the Docker formula, and I would just install the packages that way. So that's a slightly different issue. So yeah, so it's throwing up some interesting issues and some interesting thoughts about the way you structure these things, and the way you keep a consistent approach to, for example, structuring your pillar data for these formulae, constructing the relationships between all the various parts of the formula so that you're as efficient as possible. There's no point, for example, in having a whole bunch of conditional stuff buried deep in your formula if you can just conditionally swap out an entire part of it. Case in point, if my pillar data says install gitea using a binary, I don't need anything to do with the packages, and I don't need anything to do with the archive. I can skip those completely, and I can just go straight to install for the binary. So that can all be done at the very top level. The downside to that, of course, is if somebody attempts to use the lower level packages, then you may want to exclude it. To which I say, no, you might as well just put that in the documentation. Because if somebody's going to use them directly, you would assume that they knew what they were doing. Whereas if they use it, have the pillar data actually drive the process and just use the higher level, just install this software, that to me makes more sense. You say, well, okay, yes, this state is available, but the assumption is that if you're going to use the, for example, gitea software archive state, if you're going to use that state directly, you have to make the assumption that the user knows what they're doing at that point. So all you do is put in the documentation. It's assumed that you know what you're doing. And again, this comes to another thing about all of this. You try to structure software, or in this case configuration, as a series of discrete modules which are easy to understand in their own right. So you don't want to create, and we're coming now back to the bugbear of core concepts. Okay, you don't want to create a massive amount of coupling between these individual components. But you also don't want to ignore the fact that you're going to inevitably have some coupling. Case in point, if I run the binary, for example, install, I still want to run the prerequisites. Okay, and the prerequisites are going to be coming from all three of the choices. Yeah, they all want the prerequisite dependencies installed, if they've been specified. Okay, but it's perfectly possible that somebody might say, for example, not specify the git dependency in the gitea package because they don't want it installed as a package. They've got some other way of installing it. I think, yeah. So again, this comes down to the way it all sort of fits together. Same goes for the scope of things going on inside the pillar data. Yeah, it's better to repeat some information. Like for example, gitea is going to be the root of the pillar. that uniquely identifies it as scoped to this formula. Then you've got the package, when then you've got things like the dependencies, and then you've got gitea again inside that, which specifies the specifics of the gitea package rather than any of the other packages which are going to be installed. At the same level as the package level, i.e. just under the top level gitea, you've got, for example, the identities that you're going to create, the users, user groups, and so on. You've also got miscellaneous stuff, like, for example, do you want to make sure that all the directories are cleared out? If you do, then you can put the file directory state module has got a clean flag. Okay, so you can set that to be true generally by putting it into a sort of miscellaneous. This will all become obvious when I explain this when you see the documentation. But yeah, it's it requires a fair bit of pre-thought. A good example of this is the relationship between require and require in, which set the requisites for a particular stanza within your state file. And depending on how you structure your state files, depends on whether you're going to use require or require in. For example, the prerequisites are, if you isolate those and take them out and put them into their own SLS file, they can't be required in any of the other things, because you don't know which of the things you're going to need ahead of time unless you put a whole load of logic in. It makes much more sense, given that you're already going to have to put the logic in to decide between binary, archive, and package, for example. It makes much more sense to have a require back to the prerequisites. Make sure that they get installed first. Yes. Conversely, the service starting up, again, you may not need it if the package already installs the service and starts it. You may need it for package and archive, binary and archive, because they both have the issue that service is a completely separate thing. So for that, you probably do want to drive it the other way around. Okay, so the archive and binary will have a require in out to the service, because the service doesn't know ahead of time whether it's being installed in order to run against a binary install or against an archive install. And in actual fact, really the archive install is a binary install without with an extra step, because the archive extract needs to be done. So arguably you could make the binary and the archive one state file, and then just have it decide, if I'm downloading an archive, then I need to do an archive extract before I continue with the rest of the binary install. If I'm downloading the binary, then I just need to do the binary install without doing the extract. So there's an argument there to have a little bit of logic that says, if you're getting an archive or a binary, then you use this state file, and within that you have a bit of logic that says, if you're doing a binary, then you don't bother doing the archive extract. Think about that one. It might be cleaner to keep them separate and then have the archive just chain on with a require in, just chain on to a binary install, passing the information in. It's a bit of a tricky one. Right. Yeah. So lots of stuff bouncing around in me noggin. It's been a fun few minutes. Right, Mister. I'm off to bed now. Well, we'll go and start the bedtime routine. Yes.